This study is built around Mark chapter 9, verses 14 to 32. It'd be good if you could read that first. It would be even better if you can have it open in front of you while we're actually doing the study. But first of all, some notes on specific verses, and then we'll sort of start all over again, but looking more of it as a whole. Verses 14 and 15 at the beginning of this passage. Remember that at this stage of his ministry, Jesus is concentrating on the disciples, not on the crowds. We don't know where they were, but they could still have been in Gentile territory. And that's supported by the fact that a crowd gathered wanting healing, but there's no mention of any Pharisees being there trying to gather ammunition to use against Jesus. But the fact that scribes were there arguing with the crowd makes it more likely that they were in Jewish territory. Verses 16 to 18, the incident centres on a severely troubled boy. The description of his attack sounds very much like some sort of epilepsy, although he had no power of speech, which is not usually associated with epilepsy. The boy's father attributes it all to the action of a spirit of dumbness. If it was due to an unclean spirit, then the dumbness involved is clearly only one part of the package. Verse 19, it would appear that Jesus' rebuke is addressed to the disciples, or at least to those disciples who'd not been up the mountain with him, that is, the 12 minus the 3 most influential ones. Remember that the disciples had already been out on a mission without Jesus, and that their work had been met with some considerable success. Look up, if you want, chapter 6, verses 12 and 13. If they'd had that much success with demons then, what was going on that they now looks like pathetic amateurs? Verse 20. The Spirit clearly recognized Jesus and went into full armed combat mode, presumably in an attempt to intimidate Jesus. Verses 21 and 22, for some reason Jesus engages the boy's father in conversation. He's in effect gathering what we would call the medical history of the boy. The man has clearly thought that it was worthwhile bringing his son to Jesus, but we don't know whether he thought that was something of a long shot. Perhaps he brought the boy thinking, well, it might work, but if it doesn't, at least I've had a go. We don't know. Verse 23, Jesus challenges the man's attitude. We don't know whether the manner in which Jesus asked this question was purely information seeking, or whether he was giving the man a bit of a working over. It could have been a bit of both. But either way, it prompted the man to make an in for a penny, in for a pound attitude. Verse 25, the conversation seems to have taken place a little way away from the crowd, but the crowd now notice that things are hotting up and they come closer for a better view. Not wanting the crowd to complicate the matter, Jesus immediately dispatches the spirit. It's interesting that he addresses the spirit as you deaf and dumb spirit. Deafness had not been mentioned in the story thus far. Perhaps it had been mentioned, but it didn't get into Mark's account. Or perhaps it was just a reasonable assumption that the principal cause of someone not being able to speak was that they couldn't hear properly and they couldn't therefore learn to speak. Or it could be as a result of a word of knowledge that Jesus addresses the spirit as deaf and dumb spirit. Verses 26 to 29, there is then a conversation between Jesus and the disciples about their inability to deal with the spirit themselves, despite having had some notable success with other spirits on other occasions. In reply, Jesus refers to this kind of spirit. Now, it's possible that he means that this particular spirit was a difficult case, but then he seems to have been quite put out that they couldn't deal with it. It's also possible that this kind refers to any and all evil spirits, and that he means that if the disciples expect to be able to deal with such spirits on a regular basis, then they need to learn to be better prepared. We know that there were at least some times when Jesus himself spent hours in prayer away from the disciples, let alone away from the crowds. I think he's saying here that the power they've seen in his ministry is to some degree dependent on those times of preparation. And then the story finishes off in 30 to 33. Okay, let's start the study again. When I'm teaching the subject of percentages, I often find myself saying something like, there's no such thing as 25%. You can only have 25% of something. Today we'll get around to a similar statement about faith. There's no such thing as faith. You can only have faith in something or in someone. Let's centre in, to start with, on the second half of verse 24. Most of what comes in this passage we've encountered already in other passages, but this verse, this is new. In the King James Version and some of the old manuscripts, it comes out starkly in this way: Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Before I set out what I take this to mean, let's cock an ear to what other people have said about faith. It's easy to find old-style Roman Catholics or old dry evangelicals who have an entirely propositional view of faith. Faith consists of the things that you believe are true. You can also find plenty of warmer evangelicals, for instance, who say that faith is all about trusting Jesus. And then there are some dodgy healing evangelists who claim if you have enough faith, then you'll be healed. What we've got to do is to revisit those views and build up a picture of faith that we can accept. First, a brief criticism of each of those views. The propositional one first. Starting with statements of what you believe is an awkward place to start, because it makes Christianity sound more like a philosophy, something which can be summed up in a set of propositions and argued statement by statement. It quickly gets you into wars with those who believe something other than you do. Those can be wars with heretics, who are those who say they belong to us, but who believe something crucially different. I remind you that the classical creeds were written in order to weed out heretics. It's been a big subject in the history of the church. Or these arguments can be wars with infidels, those who don't pretend to belong to us and who are pushing rival beliefs. The Crusades were mounted on this basis and have been a blot on Christian heritage, never yet to be erased. Let's then move to if you've got enough faith, the healing evangelists. Or I should say the dodgy healing evangelists, not all of them. There's a mystery in the ministry of healing as to why some are healed and others aren't. You need to help people to believe, but it seems to me very damaging to do that by loading on them the entire responsibility of being healed or not. It tends to minister guilt more than healing, and I just don't think it's honest. And anyway, What about the grain of mustard seed? All right, we'll come back to that. And then the trusting Jesus view of faith. This seems to me to be the best place to start. I'll take the line that this is the heart of faith, and that other descriptions of what faith is are clarifying some aspect of this faith. So, we're assuming that the basic element of Christian faith is putting your faith in Jesus, trusting Jesus. This makes it much less obvious to talk of someone who has a lot of faith and another person who has very little faith. In an important sense, you either trust Jesus or you don't. Some people, though, speak of faith as if you've got to believe really strongly or nothing will happen, like when you're seeking healing. It makes me think of the kid who gets the wishbone and screws her eyes up in a determination to wish really hard for what they want. What's going on there? Well, presumably she's trying to bring her feelings into line with what she hopes is the truth of the situation. She hopes that if she does that, then her wish power will make her wish come true. I genuinely think that some people treat faith in that way. Let's bring back that awkward example of seeking healing. Some people seem to have a hope that their healing will happen, often a hope in a rather worldly sense, which lacks the confident assurance of real Christian hope. So they screw up their eyes, whether physically or metaphorically, in an attempt to bring their feelings into line with that hope. And they assume that if they succeed in that, then the resulting strong faith will make the healing happen. 4 points. Number 1, feelings are nice, but you can manage without them. Trusting Jesus can be a simple decision of the will. By the Lord's mercy, something clicks inside you when the Holy Spirit brings you conviction. But what you do to help that happen is largely a decision that you make, largely a line you decide to stick to. Now, when you first decide to put your trust in Jesus, if you yourself are a trustable person, then you will continue to trust him. The feelings you have at any one time might help or they might hinder. Feelings might have helped you to make the decision in the first place. But I can guarantee to you that your feelings will not consistently help you to stick to that decision. The thing that provides continuity and reliability to your faith is not your feelings, it's your will. You have made a decision and you stick to it. That's number 1. Number 2, the strength of your faith is not measured by the positive feelings you have, but by the strength of the person that you're trusting. He is the stronger man who can attack and bind the strong man who oppresses you. There's no strong man but what Jesus is stronger. That's where the strength of your faith lies, not in your screwing up your eyes in determination. Number 3, one reason why you should not argue for lots of faith is what Jesus said about the mustard seed. I told you we'd come back to it. In Matthew's version of today's story, when the disciples ask Jesus why they could not cast out the spirit, he replies in Matthew 17, verse 20, "Because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible to you." This sounds at first as if Jesus is going to join the "How much faith have you got?" brigade. But that impression disappears when he gives you the mustard seed as the example of how much faith you need. The mustard seed is so small that Jesus is saying you don't need huge quantities of faith. You need just a bit that is genuine faith and then you'll be in business. Obviously, he would be saying to this man in the story, that obviously hasn't yet happened to you. And then the fourth point about this, other people can teach what they like, but no Christian should ever teach that your strong faith makes things happen. That is a statement which is insulting to God, that strong faith makes things happen, because it cuts across the sovereignty of God. It's God who decides if you're going to be healed. It's He who issues the order, not you that generate it by screwing up your eyes in determination. There may be times when your faith helps His orders to be carried out. I used to have a car on which the brakes were servo assisted, and I had to run the car down a slope once without the engine on, and stopping at the bottom of that slope was really hard because the servo mechanism was not on. It depended on the engine running. The servo mechanism never puts the brakes on by itself, mercifully. It only ever helped me when I put the brakes on. I sometimes think that faith is a bit like that servo mechanism. If I have no faith, then God finds it desperately hard to do what He wants to in my life, because I'm pointing my life in the opposite direction to where He's wanting to go. But if I have put my faith in Jesus, then the Lord has an easier time in working in my life. There's at least some sense in which we're both going in the same direction. We're cooperating on the same venture. My faith never makes great things happen. It only ever serves to help the Lord to do what He has decided to do. I must just trust that my faith is in good enough nick so that it doesn't get in the Lord's way and might even be of some positive use to Him at some times. Let's go back to the propositional view of faith. If trusting Jesus is the basic element of faith, following in the wake of that is what we believe about Jesus and about various other things. Statements that you can make which you take to be true, propositions to which you can give your assent. If, for instance, you're going to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that is a true statement, then you must be taught that Jesus is the Son of God, and that must fit your own experience of trusting Jesus, so that something in you says yes to that teaching. The boy's father in our story most certainly did not, in any orthodox sense, believe that Jesus was the Son of God. No one had taught it to him, for the very good reason that even the disciples hadn't reached that point in their development at that time. No one had formulated that as an article of faith. The boy's father was going instead on his trusting Jesus, supported by what would seem to us like very crude beliefs about Jesus. In the story, he was even aware that his package of trust and belief was in the process of being enlarged. And the man began by thinking that it was possible, or was it probable, that Jesus could heal his boy. And then Jesus put him on the spot, and the man decided he simply had to make the extra leap of faith. So he asked Jesus to help him do it. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. The man is saying to Jesus, I have felt drawn to you, sir. I don't think I could very convincingly say why, but I know it's there. And now you've put me on the spot. I dare to hope that you can heal my boy. The more I see of you, the more that hope rises. I'm on the very point of trusting you to do it. Help! Please hold my hand while I take this leap of faith. What state then is your faith in? Would you trust Jesus to heal your son? Would your trust be immediate and undoubting? Or would you grope your way to that point a little bit like the man in our story? Are there any other indicators you can see that your faith needs to grow? Perhaps your trust needs to be reasserted. Perhaps you need to learn more of the church's teaching so you've got a better grasp of things. Perhaps you need to take action so that the statements of faith that you believe don't become the tail that wags the dog and spoil your straightforward trusting of Jesus. If any of these comments gives you pause for thought, then you need to approach Jesus like the man in the story and pray, help. I know I have faith, but I'm aware that it's out of kilter. Please help me get back on course. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief.